let's go ahead and get started. Thanks everyone for attending today's track on ICS Security, bringing order to the ICS Cyber Chaos. Just a few housekeeping notes. My name's Scott Reynolds. I'll be your facilitator for this session. It's 90 minutes long. And I also want to specifically thank our sponsors for this event. And also, this presentation is being recorded and the slides will be available in PDF format after the event. Finally, one of the attendees for the ICS Security Order to Bringing Order to ICS Cyber Chaos track will have a chance to win Practical Industrial Internet of Things Security, a practitioner's guide to securing connected industry book, the Kindle version, at the end of this. To get into that drawing, you'll just need to post your questions in the Q&A, and then we'll do a drawing at the end, which will be at the very end of this session. Again, the main point here is that we'll have our speakers, and then we'll do Q&A at the very end. Make sure you submit your questions, and also leverage hashtag IIoT World Days, plural, and get involved on social media as well. So with that, let's present our first speaker, who's Matt Morris. Matt Morris is an IoT and cybersecurity entrepreneur, executive, and author. Matt currently leads the 1898 & Co.'s Critical Infrastructure Cyber Risk and Reliability Practice. An industry luminaire, Matt spearheaded some of the most notable ICS cybersecurity programs in the industry, including Siemens, Next Defense, and Cisco. Matt has 25 years of strategy and technology leadership spanning startups, multinational, and global organizations. At Cisco, Matt was the chief product architect for the world's first managed industrial cybersecurity service, among other major achievements. Matt is a highly sought after speaker and published author in ICS Cybersecurity, and he holds 12 DHS ICS certifications. Take it away, Matt. Thanks.
Thank you for that. So welcome everybody. Happy to be with you today. Let me see if I can get this started the right way. So we'll talk a little bit about ICS cybersecurity, just as the title says, and we'll get into a number of different areas. So to kick this off, we have to put up the obligatory slide that talks a little bit about the threat landscape, and because most of you are here joining this, you probably know a little bit about this, if depending on your interest level. But the fact of the matter is, this continues to grow and expand. This kind of gives you a little bit of a decade-old view of the different attacks that have been out there, that have been perpetuated. And of course, we continue to see that this is really turning into more of the proverbial hockey stick action, where there were less attacks, let's say a decade ago. There's increasingly more attacks, and not only are there more attacks, but they tend to have a larger impact each and every time that those get perpetuated. You see some of the different groups that are responsible for this, including everything from your nation state, if we're talking about the defense and industrial base, all the way to sponsored attacks, hacktivist groups, and whatnot. So it is a reality. I think a lot of you probably know that already, and it continues to perpetuate along. Now, along those lines, we have cybersecurity standards, and we also have the regulatory regimes that get put out and continue to grow and evolve and change as well. And right now we're sitting in North America. Of course, there's global cybersecurity standards. In fact, I actually sit on one of the companies that's responsible for building those as part of the ISA group. But you see here, there's a lot of different standards from a global perspective. Some of those are regulatory in nature, where there could be fines and whatnot associated for non-compliance. And there's others that are just good, best industry practices, and all of these are important. But the thing I really want to drive home here, and the reason for pulling this up here today, is that we see, one of the things I see as a consulting group, an advisory that's coming out and talking to people about OT cybersecurity strategy, overarching governance and whatnot, is one of the big fallacies I see in the market that I want to make sure I bring up for all of you is depending on what industry you're in, especially in the regulated industries, we see a lot of people that from an organizational perspective kind of build a culture of compliance. And what I mean by that is that they really build everything because they know that there could be fines or there could be some sort of penalty involved relative to regulatory. They kind of gear everything they do around that. And the issue with that is that being compliant is one thing, and it's really important, but as the last bullet on this slide says, being compliant does not equal being secure. And from an organizational perspective, it's very important that you keep that in mind and remind your organization of that as you proceed forward. Now, in terms of, let's see if I can get this to advance. Oh, sorry. We had some lag there. So in terms of impact, when we're talking about industrial or ICS cybersecurity and the types of impact we see, it's a wholly different topic than when we're talking about IT cybersecurity. And that's not meant to really, let's say throw shade on IT cybersecurity, but IT cybersecurity at the end of the day is mostly geared around data security. So if somebody goes in and attacks, let's say Equifax, that attack happened a number of years back. That's a really bad situation. Of course, it was not good for Equifax. It was even worse for the people whose credit files got attacked. That was not a good thing. But that being said, that's a pretty significant difference from what we're talking about when we're talking about an operational technology environment, where we could be talking about, through safety, we could be talking about loss of life, or we could be talking about loss of operations that add up into the multi-millions of dollars. And this slide really just talks about some of the different impacts you may see, whether that is an impact to, again, a regulatory fine or penalty, or even if, there's a compromise or a plant goes down, what it may cost to go out and enter into the market to purchase that same type of energy, as well as just what some of the unplanned downtime really costs organizations. And you can see those are pretty sky high numbers. That last metric you see there on the bottom right really talks to the impact of a single company. Believe it or not, this was Maersk a number of years back when NotPetya, I think it was 2017, made its way into their environment. That 300 million was the cost of cleanup. That's all that was. It does not account for all the other costs to the company in terms of lost shareholder value and lost market cap, out in the stock market and so forth, as well as some of the brand impact that was encountered there as well. So we're talking about a pretty significant impact. One of the things I really wanted to, I'm really excited to be here and to talk through today comes back to kind of linking those two topics together that we talked about a few minutes ago. But before we get too deep into this, I wanted to take a moment to make this a little interactive and actually put up a poll. I'm curious how many people, I know we have people here that are interested in ICS cybersecurity, but Gray, if you go ahead and put up the poll, I'm curious how many of you work in some of the regulated industries today, whether that's utilities, oil and gas, pipelines, water, et cetera, versus people that are in non-regulated industries. If you could just vote on that real quick. We'll give that just a second. While we're waiting on that, just to talk a little bit about this particular slide. So when we talk about mind the gap, exactly what we're talking about, and the reason why we did the poll is so one of the things that we've kind of worked on a little bit, and we developed this graph to kind of show people and help illustrate what it is we're talking about when we're talking about the difference between compliance and risk management and security. And so it kind of goes like this. If you graph from left to right and you look at, here's our results. So we're not quite little off from 50-50, but we've got about 58% non-regulated versus regulated. Great, that's wonderful. So I appreciate that. If we go to graph from zero security on the far left to perfect security on the far right, and we look at, all right, how much money are we going to spend on cybersecurity mitigations? The more, obviously, as we go up the y-axis, the more we spend on cybersecurity, and this is the red line there, the better you see cybersecurity gets, except for the fact that you can never get to perfect cybersecurity. That doesn't exist, right? So that shouldn't be a shocker to anybody. If we flip that axis, but we plot it on the same scale, and we say zero risk management on the right, going all the way to perfect risk management on the far left, and we spend more money on risk management going up that axis, again, you see the similar type graph. The important thing for everybody to realize is that at some point on that graph, there's an intersection point. And what that intersection point represents, and it's different for each and every organization out there, is that is the minimum amount of money that you could spend, or investment, let's say, into cybersecurity to get the most bang for the buck from a risk management perspective. What you will notice if you look at point A on that graph is point A really represents, for the regulated industries, where regulation will get you to. So, you know, we talked about a few minutes ago, some of you may be in the utility space, there's NERC-CIP, right? NERC-CIP can get you a little ways up that line, but not really where you need to be. The same is true for AWIA and water and so forth. So when we talk about mind the gap, really what we're talking about is this difference between the two, and the importance, honestly, of going beyond a culture of compliance and building a culture of resiliency instead, that's going to protect your operations and make sure that you maintain safety within these environments. I'm sad to say, for all the 58% that's out there that's not regulated, I'm painting with a broad brush here, but for the most part, what we tend to see is that the regulated industries tend to be a little bit higher up on that graph, believe it or not, than the non-regulated industries, purely due to the fact that there is no fine, there is no penalty involved if for non-compliance. So a lot of people actually use that to their advantage and will spend less money as a result of that. Sorry, I don't know how that just popped out, but let's see if we can get it back. There we go. All right, so let's talk a little bit about some of the operational challenges that exist. And the thing that you'll find is that these really break down primarily into three different areas. You'll see a lot of things underneath that, a lot of subcomponents, but really at the end of the day, a lot of the difficulty that happens in this environment really can be traced back to insufficient visibility and awareness, and a lot of that has to do with asset inventory, also risk to critical processes and safety. You know, not everything is malicious, believe it or not. You know, more often times than not, people are coming in and doing remote connectivity into the environment, and lo and behold, they have some sort of misconfiguration that causes something to go down, causes a system to go down, whether it's a safety system, whether it's an operational system that may cause impact to the production or the plant, or lack of resources and information. There's a global cybersecurity shortage. When I was at Cisco a number of years back, I think this is 2014 or 2015, we estimated that at that point in time there's about a 1 million person shortage globally in good cybersecurity talent. Now that number, as we get close to 2021, that number is getting closer to 3.5 million. So it's getting worse, and it's getting worse faster, and that makes it very, very difficult for people. Really quick, we have a second poll, just to keep it interactive. I'm curious, which of these particular areas are you guys seeing as being the biggest risk to your particular business? And Greg, if you could fire that off, that would be spectacular. Appreciate that. And while we wait on the results of that, I'm going to go ahead and advance forward here. If it, oh, I did it again. See if we can bring it back. There we go. Keep it going. All right, so just to wrap up, we've got just a couple more slides here, and then we'll be done with this portion of the conversation. So a lot of times, you know, whenever we go in and we talk to anyone about ICS cybersecurity, there's always three facets that we're going to look at in really any situation that we go into. And you've heard it all before. I mean, many of you are very familiar with that. It's the people, process, technology sort of equation. And as I call it here, that in a lot of ways, that's kind of a three-legged stool, right? There's meant to be kind of equal to some extent. And again, I'm generalizing here, but there's meant to be kind of equal pieces to the people, process, technology equation. The problem is going back to what I was referring to a few minutes ago, there is a lack of resources, and there's a global lack of resources. And so the fact of the matter is that in many cases, it's not that you're not going to have any people, like 0 people, but you're not going to have the types of resources that you would probably really like to be able to adequately cover your environment and be able to cover the full scope of what you need to do. So as a result, the people part of the equation is a little bit skewed, which means that what we need to do is to actually lean into the process and technology side of things from an overarching solution perspective. So we got our results back. Yeah, it doesn't surprise me at all. The lack of visibility and awareness, which in a lot of ways ties back to asset inventory, is the biggest risk, that we see that as being the #1 use case out there. So so last slide, just to wrap up here, key takeaways. I know we didn't talk about this first bullet explicitly, but for anyone out there that may be a beginner, the best thing that you can do is start by baselining your environment, something we call a maturity assessment or a gap assessment. For any of you that are out there that are a part of that 42% regulated industries, mind the gap. Make sure that you're not just employing a culture of compliance, but you're also going above and beyond that. And to everybody on the call, realize that cyber talent gap is real. And you're going to really have to be serious about leaning into both a combination of process and technology to elevate that a little bit and to cover some of your bases. So thank you very much. I appreciate the time today, and look forward to the rest of the session. And now I'm going to turn this over to Richard, who I think is next. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Matt. And just again, going back to a few reminders, we do have the presentation being recorded. We also have that questionnaire, that Q&A tool at the bottom of your screen. So click on that and ask your questions, and we'll get to those when we can at the end of the presentation. Also, these slides will be available at the end of the event. And please, again, submit your questions, whatever you have, so that you don't forget what you were about to ask. So that you can retain that information. Moving on, we have Richard, who's going to be talking about addressing the business and cybersecurity challenges in cybersecurity. And Richard Koo has been working in the cybersecurity industry and with Trend Micro for more than 28 years, working on a number of leading roles from individual contributor to management positions. Richard has an extensive domain knowledge working and developing security products and services for multiple segments of the market, from customer to small business and to some of the world's largest enterprise customers in both IT and OT. The last 5 years, Richard is responsible for the sales and marketing development of Trend Micro's industrial IoT security business in the Americas and helping customers. Richard, take it away. Thanks.
Thanks, Scott. Appreciate it. And thanks, Matt. So good afternoon and good evening or good morning to everyone, wherever you're calling from. Hope everyone is staying safe. As Scott mentioned, my topic is addressing the business and technical challenge on the new Industrial 4.0 convergence. And so I'll let what I'm going to do is basically cover this agenda, right? We'll go a little bit more deep dive into some of the statistics and analytics on the threat landscape and some of the attack vectors, and what are some of the industry, business, and technical challenge. Well, you know, I think Matt already kind of touched up on some of the risks, so I'm going to touch lightly on that as well. And then, of course, we'll talk about some of the best practice on a high level. And I'm going to drill down a little bit more detail into some of the solution that Trend Micro have been provided for the industrial or the OT environment. I think many times we have a lot of conversation around, security solution out there for OT or ICS. And sometimes it's difficult for people to get their hands on. So on this particular presentation, I'm going to drill down a little bit more deeper into some of the technology and product we have. All right, and hopefully we have time to cover who Trend Micro is. All right, so the threat landscape, right, and also the different type of threat vectors, that we're seeing today, right? And so before I drill down to the kind of the specific of the threat landscape, let me kind of touch on a little bit on the why some of the current, right, I would say customer or some of the environment are still being impacted, right, and why they're being basically not being addressed properly today, right? And so here is a study by some of the industry leading analyst firm, and as you can see from this data and this statistic, and 84% of the organization that have adopted some type of IoT have experienced some type of basically IoT related security breaches or attack. And that's very high. And of course, you can see that on the research, also 90% of the industrial company that have experienced cyber attack breach, right, as well. And then of course, you can see that 50% of the industry company also experienced some type of breach within the last year, right? And that's very, very high. And then of course, 80% of security professionals say IoT breaches are more expensive to find and fix than traditional security incident. And I think Matt kind of mentioned that on some of the slide that he's talking about. And then here's another statistic where we see 20% of the, basically asset or device out there are vulnerable, right? And they are ranked as very critical. So, from a OT cybersecurity perspective, these solutions out there are not quite as effective, in helping our customer. All right. No, I'm just going the wrong way. Can you get me to the other slide? Yeah, next slide. Scott, I'll let you just maybe move the slide, be easier for us. Okay. So here's some very specific detail, right? This is the number of threat that Trend Micro actually block every year. As you can see, every year we block more than 48 billion threats, right? And that ended up coming from the internet, through some type of browser, through our customer environment, and that feed all the threat back to our, smart protection network in the back end. So the number is huge, and we have more than 250 million sensors and devices out there really capturing all this information, and feed that back to us, so we don't understand what's going on from a threat perspective. And as you can see, we also do about 2.5 trillion plus threat query every year to really find out what's going on out there in the world when it comes to this type of attacks. And specifically for 2019 and 2020, right? These are some stats, right? As you can see, from a malicious app perspective, we have blocked more than 86 million, right? And then malicious app, and then malicious URL, we block more than 1 billion URL. And of course, from an email threat such as Office 365 or any type of email that you are using, we blocked more than 42 billion email threat, between 2019 and 2020. And, and right now, basically, in terms of malicious file, we basically blocked more than, 6 billion type of files that has been compromised or is coming through. So you can see the number is just huge in terms of the threat. And as Matt mentioned earlier, right, the attacks, some of these are real. Next slide, Scott. This is another statistic that I actually got from Applied Control Solution from Joe Wise. And Joe Wise is a well-renowned, basically ICS security expert, especially in the power and as well as in the, ICS industry. So he had been keeping record of this, type of incident, and you can see that there are more than 1,100 plus incident up to date, and it's counting in terms of attack in the ICS environment. And more than 2 million plus ICS devices are directly connected to the internet, right? And many of these are actually gateway, right, and directly connected to the company or the organization. And the impact can range anything from very significant discharge of, let's say, information, or to basic equipment damage, or even to major electrical outage, or even death, right? And I would say that more than 70 billion indirectly related to kind of the impact in terms of the economics. So you can see these are also very, very significant impact on many of the organization in this industry. The next slide, Matt. Oh, Scott. Right, I'm not going to walk through this slide. Matt kind of walked through a little bit, but this is going to give you a high-level ICS cyber threat in the incident and impact and timeline in terms of what type of attack had happened over the last couple of decades. And you can see that starting in 2010, right, you have this Stuxnet attack, right, with the basically Iranian power plant, and 20% of the centrifuge actually was damaged and have some impact on there. To some of the very recent attacks like 2018 and 2019, where you can see here, right, there was an attack with the TSMC, right, a manufacturing company in Taiwan that was impacted, and basically causing many of the plant was down for many weeks, and causing more than $250 million, over the time. So these are just a real data showing real attack across different industry, across different verticals. And you can see here, this is what we're talking about is real, is not, it's not nothing that is not happening. It's real number, real activity, and real damage is happening. All right, next slide, Scott. In terms of the threat vector, so this is a good example of a kind of a high-level network diagram showing kind of how a particular attack will go from, the internet attack your traditional IT networks, and then from then they maybe gain credential and then gain access to the OT networks and be able to compromise many of those, say field devices, or even some of the SCADA system of the OT environment, right? And this very example was kind of that Ukrainian attacks happened back, I think a couple of years ago, where basically the adversary gained access to the IT networks and be able to stay there and looking for potential credential and be able to access the credential to the OT network. They be able to basically go to the OT network, perform lateral movement, able to shut down many of the HMI machine and PLC system, and basically more than 200,000 customer was in the dark for days, right? So this is just an example of an attack vector that because of the convergence of the IT and OT, right, the adversary now really be able to kind of go from IT to OT or vice versa. And so we just have to be aware of those different type of attacks out there. Next slide. Here's an additional, attack vectors that I'm not going to mention through it. I will share the slide with you folks, but as you can see, right, wireless attacks or web application attacks or communication protocols, those are very much also a threat vectors for the attackers to really compromise your, OT networks. So just keep some of this in mind. Next slide. And what do we see out there in terms of industrial, industry, business, and technical challenge? Next slide. So Matt kind of mentioned a lot of this stuff already. He's talking about the lack of domain knowledge, which we all see that as the convergence of IT OT. I would definitely see a lack of knowledge in terms of security expertise and good countermeasure in the OT environment. And also this, convergence of IT OT, definitely, one of the things I see a lot as I talk to many of my customer and partners is the roles and responsibility between both organizations are very unclear today, right? And hopefully over time, they will be able to maybe work together and collaborate and make sure that they can have a better understanding of what's going on in the customer environment. So to them, that's also a big challenge. And then of course, we have all the different legacy system right, out there, you know, where it's very difficult to, you know, say perform update or, you know, fix the vulnerability because some of the legacy system been around for, you know, decades, right? And that need to be addressed as well. And of course, last but not least, really also kind of the pursue our productivity over economic, right? You know, I mean, you know, maybe the C-level people want to address some of the, you know, economics first, and, you know, security be kind of more about low priority, right? So these are some of the big, I think, in the industry and business challenge I see. Next. In terms of some of the technical challenge, right? You know, Matt also talked about the shadow IT, right? The one thing I also want to touch on this is the lack of security by design, right? There are, because many of the, you know, I would say device or technology out there have been, you know, basically done way back, and security was never really thought through, and, you know, security was never in the priority. And so there is a lack of security by design for many of these old systems. Right, and of course you have all the different type of insecure protocol, application, operating system we all talk about, and you know, not just the new threat, but also you can all the traditional threat like malware, APT, ransomware, and state-sponsored type of attacks. They are very much a technical challenge for many of these you know, OT organizations on how to address that. Right, so you know, this is a big issue, and you know, like I say, everybody know about cybersecurity, but the challenge is knowing how to apply it properly into this kind of environment, and that also is very, very important. Next slide. So what are some of the risks to ICS and OT? Next slide. So basically, this is a very typical, you know, I would say, industry risk model that we created, or I created, for showing the level of, I would say, automation, you know, and also the impact in terms of the business operation. You can see on the top or on the lower left-hand corner, started from industry 1.0 to now in industry 4.0, and you can see as you, the automation and connectivities are increasing, right? And the connectivities are increasing, right? And you have a level of complexity, you know, within the organization that also basically increase the risk into the operational and the complexity and the threat into the organization, right? So, you know, I think like every industry or every, you know, every decade, you have this change in the platform or something kind of, and you're gonna see this kind of, you know, I would say type of increase in risk. And it's very similar to that of the, I think, ICS environment or in the OT environment as well. And next slide. So when looking at risk, right, here are some of the things that I would recommend, right? You know, basically, look at what's most valuable, right? The value of the equipment, the asset to the business, right? Think about that. And also what would cause the, you know, I would say most disruptive to you know, how would affect the business overall, and when you look at some of this risk. And, you know, are there any type of, you know, redundancy, you know, that, you know, if something fail or you know, happen, are you able to, you know, get back online, be able to get that system up and running, right? So, and of course, look at the type of attackers and the level of sophistication they have, right? So these are some of the few items that I think you can look at and, you know, try to understand, you know, when looking at risk. Next slide. And again, I think that's an example, but here's, as we talked about on the previous model, right? That's kind of the risk, but reducing risk also is somewhat very similar to this maturity model, where as you have, in, you know, going from industry 1.0 to 4.0, and the technology that you adopt and implement, right, it give you, you know, an increase in the visibilities. And they also will give you a, you know, basic increase in prevention and detection and response and collaboration. That really going to help you kind of reduce some of the risk and, you know, the complexity in your organization, right? So this model is going to just explain on a very high level, you know, how you can actually improve and, you know, reduce your risk within your organization. Next slide. So what are some of the best practice? Well, Matt kind of touched up on this already a lot, and as I talk to many of my customers and partners, this is also 3 very key pillars to a good IIoT cyber strategy, right? Is it people, process, and technology, right? From a people perspective, I mean, we need to make sure that, our staff are trained and aware of, cybersecurity and knowledge. And we want to make sure that we have the professional skills and qualification to really deal with some of these challenges, right? Make sure we have the competent, and the resource to deal with it, right? The process, right? Make sure that you have governance, policy, and framework in place. Provide some good best practice, and some level of IIoT auditing, right? That's also very good. And from a technology perspective, right? Not every technology can work, right, on the OT environment, right? I have talk and see customer where they try to deploy IT product into the OT environment, and sometimes it causes more problem than helping it, right? So make sure that every technology you bring into the OT environment are tested and verify and validate, and make sure that you can adapt to that kind of environment, right? And make sure you have the right people, right, to really deploy, the solution to this kind of environment, right? As we mentioned, we all know about cybersecurity, right? But implementing and making it work properly into the OT environment can be a challenge, and you need to make sure that you have the technology and the right people. So all these are all interrelated as a very key overall strategy for your cybersecurity strategy for OT. Next, here are some of the industry standard best practice, right? And I think Matt also had this slide in there, but this basically a good reference, right, standard that you can use as an organization, depending on what vector you go, coming from, to be energy and general industry or IT. There are certain type of industry standard like IEC 62443 standard. These are good for global industrial automation, right? And if you have NERC, right, IEC 62351 and NERC SIP, those are very good standard for you to use as a guidance, right? So many of these standards already out there, and so you don't need to reinvent the wheel, to really begin your cybersecurity strategy for your OT environment. Next slide. And so here's also some key things to think about as you're looking at your kind of OT environment, right? Looking at what type of solution, what type of technology are there, right? Make sure that you have purpose-built ICS OT security solution for your environment, right? And maybe even secure not just on the high level at the parameter, but also make sure that you secure at the shop floor, right? Will provide some real-time protection in enforcement. Make sure you have some level of visibility into the asset, the protocol, control, command, and threat, right? And you do want to have a very comprehensive, protection, just like on the IT side, right? Everything from level 0 all the way up to the level 3, and maybe possibly in the cloud if you are adopting cloud and virtualization as one of your transformation. And then make sure that the solution you have, actually can be adapted to existing infrastructure, right? Is not at, basically rip and replace, in many of this environment, right? Some of the system been there for years. And so you want to make sure that you build or find the right solution that can actually be adaptable to your existing environment. And some level of management or, some level of control to allow you to have some level of distribution and, and so forth in those kind of environment, right? All right, next slide. All right, so I'm going to touch up, skip the next slide, Scott. Next slide, yeah. So what do we have on the back one slide? One more slide back. Yeah, so this is what Trend Micro offer in terms of ICS security solution. Scott, go back to the other slide. No, yes, that slide, right, okay. So this is how our security solution are mapped into the, ISA 99 or 62243 reference architecture. As you can see here on the left side, it's kind of your Purdue model, right? From level 0 to level, 3, right? And then of course, on the right side is your IT environment, and on the top is kind of your cloud virtualization environment. So this is a very typical high level, I would say, architecture that's showing how Trend Micro actually is addressing cybersecurity on the OT environment, you know, starting from level 0, at the sensors, the device, and then go up to the level 1, level 2, level 3, right? And so we have solution that can actually address every of this area, everything from a micro segmentation to basically an IPS to your traditional, you know, anti-malware or APT or ransomware type of protection across every level of the OT environment. So we do have a very complete solution on this. If you have a lot of air gap environment, or people will say not connected to corporate networks, you know, we also have solution to allow you to address some of this concern as well, right? Okay, next slide.
Richard, I'm going to step in because we're running over a little bit, if that's okay.
Okay, yeah, so give me the last slide. Let's go to the last slide. Yeah, key takeaway. No, the key takeaway. Yeah. So again, some key takeaway, right? The world is changing quickly, and you know threats are real, as Matt also mentioned. And so cybersecurity is the foundation for digital transformation, right? And so many of organizations here, including Trend Micro, actually here to help you guys go through that transformation security. And so, yeah, that's kind of my short, you know, 15, 20 minute, you know, highlight on some of the topics here. Thanks, Scott.
Thank you. And really appreciate a lot of great topics going through pretty quickly, and I appreciate that. Again, we do have Q&A, and keep those questions coming in. Those are great. Let's keep moving on this. And next up, we have Kevin Owens. Kevin has more than 25 years of experience in cybersecurity in both the commercial industry and government sector, specifically the Department of Defense, uniquely qualifying him to examine the networks from an adversary's point of view. Kevin has traveled globally, responding to security incidents and performing cyber and physical security assessments, creating more defensible network postures, increasing the customer's ability to detect and respond to attacks by closing vulnerabilities and significantly enhancing security. He has coordinated with several government agencies, law enforcement, national intelligence entities, private sector, and international constituents on cybersecurity issues and events. Today, he's going to be talking about CMMC and, oh, sorry about that. He's going to be talking about creating and performing a cybersecurity tabletop exercise. Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks for that introduction, Scott. So tabletop exercise, there's a number of slides here, but the nice thing that Scott mentioned earlier is these slides are going to be released in a PDF. So you will have them and use this as a template for creating exercises for your own organizations and walk through those 10 steps. So tabletop exercises are to simulate a real world incident, whether it is a natural disaster, a physical attack, or a cyber incident. And this kind of gives you a story with events that occur throughout and how to respond to it. Typically, this takes about 2 months to build and plan for this. And then the exercise is a half a day or a full day. So the first step is determine what type of exercise you're going to do. Do I want to test my disaster recovery plan? If so, you know, perhaps there's an event of we have a successful ransomware attack. How do we run through that scenario? And there's so many organizations right now that are dealing with ransomware attacks. So the next step is building your team, the team that's going to design this event. So what are the team members we're going to have on there? And it's going to have not just your operational people, it's going to have people from legal, it's going to have someone probably from HR or finance, production. All those people are going to be part of the team. Also, you're going to have who is your exercise facilitator. And you got a simulation team, you're going to have observers that are going to be recording events that happen and how do the participants respond to it? Did they meet all the objectives? You're going to have hopefully some assistants who are going to run around and do things for you while everything's going on. And depending on the size of this, you could have a scribe who's writing down all the events and things that are happening. So here's an example of some of the different organizations that are on your exercise team. These are just quick breakdown of all those different groups, from IT and OT to legal to HR. There's a lot of people that you want to have involved to address everything. So next, you create the exercise plan. What are we doing? What's the scope? What's our goal, our objectives? What's our agenda? What are we going to tell the participants who are active in this? What are they going to be doing? How are we going to communicate things to them? How are we going to evaluate how everyone did? And then what assumptions are we going to make? So the first thing is you got to create a story. What's going to happen? What's driving that? What's that narrative? So could our company be hacked? And I think we all know the answer to that one is yes. But how could this happen? Is it a disgruntled employee? Is it a disgruntled former employee? Is it a malicious actor? Is it a spear phishing incident that caused this to happen? How long ago did it happen? Did it happen today, last week? Was the breach 6 months ago and we're not seeing the effects until today? And so how is everything going to be revealed? And like I said before, you can do this for both cyber and physical. So here's an example of a physical where we've got a lot of utilities out there who may have to deal with an earthquake or a flood or a hurricane. How do you react to that? And so you're creating those different, things you want to test, as well as the scenario. And you lay out, what the greater area looks like. We've got a problem at our organization. What happens to the surrounding area? Where's our meeting point? Dealing with things like wind direction. And then you also want to look at, how do I move the story forward? And that was our injects. So these are things that occur like, our files on our database servers are slowly being encrypted, or a denial of service occurs, and all of a sudden you've got a customer that's venting on social media about what's happening to your company and why can't they get to their account. And so these injects are going to trigger some kind of action. And that's what they're designed to. So everybody has to gather together, give their pieces of information, talk, decide on what to do next. And then everybody's going to have to collaborate, because there's going to be people who have key pieces of information. So here's someone who is in IT who has information about this occurred on the firewall. Then there's going to be someone else who's got a piece. And then, so you're going to have multiple people who have pieces, as well as you're going to have people who have responses of, here's the policy that we have or the procedure to walk through this scenario. If you're responding to incident, to social media, there may be an official response that your company already has somebody to give that public response out there on social media. And then there are some injects which just aren't important. I'm going to deal with the most important things. So what things should we defer right now? Because you can't deal with everything. So you want to explain the rules of the exercise. So going back to that physical one, you've got different things that are occurring at the same time. What's low priority, what's high priority, but you've got your evaluators who are observing everything, and they're going to look at what did the team do? How did they accomplish it? Did they only partially complete it? Did they fully do it? Or did they just forget about it because it was a low priority? You want to see, you know, engage how the team responded to the events. Cybersecurity scenarios. Here's where things can get pretty elaborate, because you want to deal with creating all those scenarios and walking through those particular things. It could be just a portion. I only want to test this event, or it could be a widespread thing. Now, as I said earlier, it could take a couple of months to build something like this, but if you want to be more elaborate and have create a hybrid scenario where you actually have live stuff and live data that's being injected, you know, here's things that are coming up and they're tripping real devices right now, gives it a sense of realism, and so the team has to respond. This is a bringing it up a notch. So you're going to take probably 3 to 6 months of planning to build something like this, and you're not going to do it in a half a day. You're going to plan this over, you know, 3 to 5 days to run through your scenario. But again, takes a lot more time and resources to put something like that together. So the overall goal is you're trying to increase that cybersecurity awareness, the skills of your participants. So you want to have a clear goal, determine how the team is going to respond, observe what they're doing, how do they detect things, how do they respond, how do they recover to those simulated events, and then look at lessons learned. What worked well, what didn't work well? And then how can we improve this in the future? How can we add some of those more live events into the scenario? So when you're building this, one of the things you need to do is go back and look at your injects one more time before the scenario, because you want to make sure everything is watertight, because your participants will be very creative and they'll think about things you didn't plan for, or they'll throw something else out there. And that's why you want to try and run through all of those events to make sure you know, if something occurs that you didn't plan for, how do you take that offline, coordinate with the team, and get a quick response back to them? Because you can't go, oh, we didn't think about that, scenario over. No, you have to have a response. Oops. So step 7 is leading up to that big exercise day. You want to, oops, back a slide. Oh. Let's see. Scott, can you back it up a slide? For some reason, oh, there we go. Thanks. So you want to run through, look at the layout for the room. Usually you're doing it in a large conference room, lay out all the documentation, go through some pre-exercise training for all the participants so they understand what's going to happen, what you expect of them, and have last minute reminders for the team. Scott, can you advance it for me? Thanks. So on your big exercise day, what are the tasks for the team? You've got a kickoff in the morning, and then halfway through the exercise, you've got a midpoint check. how's everything going? Everything going well? And, you know, that's why I said you have to have that plan for what do you do when things don't go according to plan. At the end of the exercise, you actually have a debrief of the participants as well as the exercise team itself. So your team, how did everything go? Next slide, Scott. So you also want to gain feedback from all the facilitators and participants. How well did everything work? So here's just an example of one. Next slide, Scott. And that feedback is going to help you build the after action report. So that's has all those lessons and the findings that you occurred. Because when you're running through that scenario, you're going to find things that not everything went to plan, and where were procedures or policies not there that were found as a fault of the company. So that's where you sit there and go, we have to fix this, because if this scenario were to happen, we don't have anything. So the last step is having a follow-up. So you actually present that after action report and you find those things that were missing. So you build a poem, a plan of action and milestones. So you look at what did we as an organization have that was lacking? How do we fix that? And so what's the plan moving forward to address that? So then you want to follow up on those milestones and actually track progress to show that your organization has improved to increase your resiliency. Next slide, Scott. So there's a lot of information out there. DHS, CISA, formerly, US CERT and ICS CERT has a lot of information out there. MITRE that we talked about earlier, FEMA, NIST, there's lots of information out there. And that's it. So, thanks, Scott.
Great, thanks, Kevin. Great talk too. Moving on. Again, I just want to remind a few people that we do have Q&A, and please fill out your questions in there if you have any questions. The slides will be available after this event in PDF format. And also, we do have a drawing that we talked about at the beginning of this for the people who do submit their questions during the session. So make sure you get your questions in. Next up, we're talking. We have Michael Ritchie, and he is going to talk about CMMC, which is the Department of Defense's new cybersecurity standard. Michael has 25 years of experience in the technology industry and startup ecosystem. An accomplished leader and respected technical expert, Michael brings in extensive knowledge of full life cycle software development and production operations. Take it away, Michael.
Thank you for the nice intro. I appreciate everyone taking the time to attend today. I'm going to give you an overview of CMMC. I don't think I have control. Let's go back. Okay, we'll go from here. I believe I finally have control. That's me on the left there. I am a co-founder of Surety Drive. Our executive team has over 85 years combined industry experience. And we specialize in getting the defense industrial base contractors to the Department of Defense. We specialize in getting them prepared to be compliant under their current contract regulations and with CMMC, which is the upcoming standard. Let's see if it's going to let me advance the slides. It is. So let's look at a typical industry. What's a banker's business, right? So bankers originally just changed money and made loans. But they found out very quickly they were actually in the business of keeping the money safe because they had what everyone wanted. So if you weren't confident that the bank would keep the money safe, you would not do business with them. Similarly, the healthcare industry has had the same issue. They thought they were in the business of just doing diagnosis and treatment of your health, but they found out starting about 40 years ago that they were actually also in the business of keeping your privacy. So that started with HIPAA compliance and the HITECH Act, and cybersecurity is pretty strong these days in banking and in healthcare. The same thing is happening within the defense industry. So let's look at an example here. This is the Lockheed Martin F-35B. Take a good look at that plane. We expect to spend as a nation $1.5 trillion over the lifespan of this project. $1.5 trillion. So take a look at this plane in the next slide. This is the Chinese J-18. They stole the plans straight out from us. So while we're spending $1.5 trillion, they're going to spend about $1 billion and build the same plane. And they're going to meet us head to head. I mean, you take a good look at that picture and you can see it's let's go back one slide. It's the same plane. So the defense contractor's job is not just to provide the product that they're developing for the Department of Defense, it's to keep the secrets too. Now with classified information, this is always known. But what we're finding is that there's another grouping of information that you'll hear a new term called CUI, controlled unclassified information. It's information that's not classified, but is also not public. This information is very advantageous to our enemies. And so that's what we're trying to protect. I believe I keep losing control of the screen. No, it's just delayed. So let's look at a timeline for this. So starting back in 1976, we had the ITARS regulation. So that controlled what you could release outside of the continental US and what information and products you could distribute. So fast forward a little bit, in 2008, we started designating what type of information could and could not be shared outside, even inside the US with the general population. In 2010, FedRAMP was announced. So FedRAMP is cloud services is what it is concerned. But in 2011, under the Obama administration, there was an executive order that defined controlled unclassified information and set regulations on who can control it. So that's information that's not classified, but it's also not publicly distributable. So by 2012, we had FedRAMP, which is regulation that covers cloud services. And by 2015, we had NIST standard. I believe that Richard had mentioned NIST 53. NIST 800-171 is a co-standard that's very similar to 53. 853 under NIST covers government systems. NIST 800-171 is the standard for implementing a non-government system for a government contractor. So if you are Boeing, you are expected to implement under contract NIST 800-171. So by 2016, they were pushing this standard hard. It was already covered under your contract. You were supposed to be implementing it, but they asked defense contractors to start with 15 controls out of 120. Start there, implement those, and then have a plan to move forward and implement the entire standard. It was very lackluster. Most companies just ignored the standard altogether or did a very minimal implementation. By 2017, when the deadline came around, they discovered that wasn't working at all. You can't clamp down on the whole industry. It doesn't work. So they took a step back and evaluated what to do. In 2019, they developed CMMC. So that's the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. And so what that is a Uber standard, where they looked at all the available top standards worldwide, combined them into one. Everyone tries to make their own best standard, and this is another attempt to do so. But a lot of work was put into this. And the difference from what they had asked for before from defense contractors is with CMMC, you have to be audited by a third party. And how they're going to implement this is they're going to put it on the RFIs and the RFPs for the defense contracts. So CMMC will have 5 levels of compliance. The contract and the RFI for just before the contract, those will have a level of requirement for CMMC, and you will have to be audited by a third party to prove you are compliant prior to being awarded the contract. So that's how it's going to be enforced. All that's going to be in place by the end of 2020, and the audits are going to start in January of 2021, and that's the current timeline. It was already delayed somewhat because of all the COVID mess that we're in now, and it could be delayed again, but right now that's the timeline that they're holding to. So what's the difference here? So DFARS is the contract that you're under if you do production for the defense industry. Under DFARS, there are requirements that aren't mentioned in NIST, but NIST is pretty much the implementation standard. CMMC includes everything that was in NIST 800-171 plus adds to it. And think about it, the reason CMMC sounds familiar to you is if you've ever done anything with a capability maturity model, CMM, they play it off of that name because that's what they were trying to build with CMMC, is a capability maturity model like standard for cybersecurity. So rather than just have things you have to do, like have a password complexity standard, they wanted to build in capabilities. They wanted you to actually say, I don't just do these things that are good for my cybersecurity, but I have a capability that I am proving that I'm doing it with my policies and procedures, and I'm tracking it, and I'm able to go in and pass an audit to prove. So that's where you find the overlaps. That's very similar to the capability maturity model. Is it's not enough just to do it. You have to document it and be able to prove that you did it. So CMMC has 5 levels I've mentioned before. Level 1 is very simple. If a company's not doing level 1, they're not even trying to do anything with cybersecurity. It's very simple practices such as password standards, authenticating users before you give them access, only giving people access to things they need to have access to. That's what's covered under level 1. If you sell an off-the-shelf product, let's say you sell toilet paper to the Department of Defense, you're probably only going to be required to do level 1. But if you actually are given information that's controlled information, plans for products, schematics, maybe a map of a base because you do the landscaping on that, that's going to move you up to level 3 because they're passing information to you that's controlled, and you're expected to have a mature process to be able to retain that information and control where it's distributed to. So really, if you handle controlled and classified information, or CUI, you're going to have to be level 3 or up. Level 3 or up is 58 practices that's defined under CMMC, and it maps pretty well to the 800-171 of the NIST standard. As you move up in what type of information is passed to you, the contract may require level 4 or 5. A good way to look at this is most modern hospitals are operating at a level 3 cybersecurity standard right now. If they're really state-of-the-art, they might be up to a level 4. You'll probably only find level 5 organizations in someone who deals with classified information because the level of practice there is quite strict. They also defined in CMMC a new term, which is federal contract information. And the reason they defined it and are building it into the contracts is they want to make you responsible for not releasing information that is contract information, but not necessarily controlled information. So contract information might be that they ordered 500 rolls of toilet paper from you a week and it's delivered to a base. That would be federal contract information. So if you think about controlling this information, it's not just applying control of this to who sees it inside your company, but also if you pass off your company's books to, say, an outside bookkeeper, do you have full knowledge and control of what they're doing with that same information? So that's what they're trying to cover with FCI. FCI starts at level 1. So just a cumulative view of CMMC again, you know, the number of practices and processes required under CMMC increases as you go up. So at level 3, you actually are doing everything in level 1, 2, and 3. So it's cumulative and goes up. So let's look at a few of these domains and talk about them. Most of them will not be unfamiliar to people who have dealt with cybersecurity standards before, but again, it's an all-encompassing domain. So for example, access control would have controls under it that have to do with password length and how long you allow people to keep a password before changing it. That would be something very familiar to someone who's typically dealt with cybersecurity. But also under this standard is you have personnel security. So do you know who the people are before you give them an account to your IT systems? Really? You know, most companies are typically are used to bringing in outside contractors, giving them access and let it go. This standard is going to require you to know who they are, including background checks, and to validate that they are who they say they are before you give them access to your cybersecurity systems. So a lot of HR practices and a lot of physical security practices that you normally would not think of falling under cybersecurity are included in the standard, as well as your physical security of your facilities. So it's not just bits and bytes, it's also who has access to what. A lot of people are not aware that most modern computer systems, if you have physical access to the device, you can compromise the device. If I can touch the hardware, I can compromise it. So physical security is becoming much more important than it used to be, or at least has been paid attention to more. And so that's our basic overview, and I'll be available to answer questions either in the chat or also in the follow-up.
Great, thanks, Michael. That was great. Finally, our last speaker today is Jeff Hussey, who is going to talk about best practices and strategy for ICS cybersecurity. Jeff is the co-founder, president, and CEO of Tempered, purveyor of Airwall, a groundbreaking IoT security platform, an accomplished entrepreneur and business leader with a proven track record in the networking and security market. Hussey has also founded F5 Networks, a global leader in application delivery, and an S&P 500 listed company. He was also the executive chairman for Lockdown Networks, a pioneer of intrusion detection and prevention market, which he sold to McAfee in 2008. He currently serves on several technology and philanthropic boards. Jeff, take it away. Oh, Jeff, I think you're muted.
Thanks, Scott, and thanks for the opportunity to participate in this panel. Very interesting dialogue up until this point, and I hope to maintain that standard. I don't have the slide forwarding button showed, so you just go ahead and advance the slide. There we go. As mentioned, I'm the founder and CEO of Tempered, which is a company, and today I want to talk about innovations that have occurred in the marketplace that address some of the issues that are highlighted here today. Next slide. as has been noted, many businesses of all types are undergoing a digital transformation, Industry 4.0, wide variety of monikers for that. But basically, it means that the air gap that once existed for the industrial networks that have been with us for decades now is no longer in effect. Got a delay here. And so because of the loss of that air gap, risks are increasing as staggering numbers of things continue to be connected both to the public and network and private clouds and so forth. And the problem is that the attack surface is simply having a real challenge advancing these slides. And the attack surface simply continues to explode. When I started this company 6 years ago, I was motivated by things like the Target hack and the NotPetya and so forth, because it was clear to me that that was kind of the new frontier of security. F5 at the time was only beginning to dabble in the security market, but I was convinced that trying to pursue a conventional approach wasn't going to ever solve the problem. And so that's why we did this and have focused on actually fixing the fundamental flaw that exists in the networks that people have deployed over the last 20 years. Next slide. So the problem that we all face is that we use TCP/IP, and TCP/IP was invented 60 years ago, but it accidentally became the backbone of global commerce and communications, and is what nearly everything that is discussed today and elsewhere is connected via. And it has a fundamental problem. And that's because of what was going on when it was designed. See, back in the day, a guy named Vince Cerf, who's a researcher at Stanford, would ring up his buddy Len Kleinworth, who was a researcher at UCLA. And then they would set their handsets down on their analog coupled modems and their computers, which were at the time the size of office buildings, through routers the size of refrigerators, would negotiate a session. Click the slide ahead a couple more times, Scott, thanks. And so that was the paradigm at the time. Much has changed since then. We now carry supercomputers around in our pocket. But back then, security was a voice print and nothing moved. So you get a protocol where they use the IP address both as locator and identifier. That is the technical equivalent of going to a cocktail party and introducing yourself with your social security number. You just wouldn't do it. And so this notion of an address being both locator and identifier is the fatal flaw and creates so many of the issues that we're discussing today and a very large network security industry. It's our contention that a different approach is required, and work on such an approach has been underway for 20 years, starting in 1999. It's called the Host Identity Protocol, and it got its first RFC in 2015. Tempered is the first company to commercialize a secure networking solution based on it. And next slide. Here's how it differs. One more click. Conventional or traditional networking, everything that connects to the network is trusted. So by default, you can't trust it. Anything can get onto the network, and in most cases, with relative ease, move laterally within that network. Matt Morris's presentation had a very effective slide on that. With the host identity protocol, nothing is trusted. So that means that once it's onto the network, it's trustworthy. And we do that because by way of separating the address from the identity. So we use and extend the useful life of existing infrastructure to both locate and data, or locate hosts and then forward traffic. But policy on the network, what talks to what, is based only on unique cryptographic identities that are assigned at the initiation of that device onto the network. So, okay, next slide, please. So what that does is it makes an invisible network. It's natively zero trust, and it simply can't be found by hackers or any other malicious threat, whether that's external or internal to the organization. So I live in the Northwest. Our company is headquartered in Seattle, and we have sold to a large local city for several years now. And they've been deploying our solution called the Airwall. Recently, that city commissioned a new water treatment facility, and part of the commissioning involved having a penetration test. So here's what happened. Pen testers show up, takes them about an hour to get through the Cisco firewall. In another 30 minutes, they'd exfiltrated enough data to enable themselves to print their own RFID badges, which got them through physical security and into the data center. That's a worst case outcome for any pen test. So there were some red faces. People were scrambling around trying to figure out what to do. And they got wind of this so-called Airwall thing that was being used elsewhere in the city. And so we got a call and went and provisioned the Airwall and provided access to the technicians that needed remote access or internal access. And they were satisfied, and they called the pen testers back. This time, it was a different outcome. The pen testers were banging away on their keyboards for 45 minutes. And then in a fit of frustration, they call up the staff and say, come on guys, turn the firewalls on so we can begin the test. Fact is, they just simply couldn't find it because they weren't trusted, and there's no visible footprint to the host identity protocol. So next slide. So here's what happens in a deployment of technology like I'm referring to. And I'm just going to explain this in terms of its difference between conventional approach. Using conventional networking approaches in a typical ICS environment, perhaps a manufacturing plant, at every point, whether that's an HMI, a robot, a controller, a legacy device, remote technicians, or analytics servers, there are configuration points. Those could be VPNs, edge firewalls, wireless access points, and so forth. And to maintain any semblance of a rudimentary security protocol requires configuration, typically at the command line, at each one of these configuration points for initiation and any adds, moves, and changes. That's an impossible amount of complexity to contend with. And in an environment where there's going to be a shortage next year of 3.5 million security professionals worldwide, that is only a problem that can be solved by software. Next slide. So the software needs to overcome a number of challenges. Persistent threats, the lack of segmentation for individual control systems, vendor remote access, high availability, and compliance and audit requirements. Next slide. And to do that effectively, you can't have 15 solutions with 15 different interfaces or however many solutions that are required to meet the level of security that will be the most cost-effective or efficient use of capital to get as someone else characterized it, to mind the gap. And so what we've developed is a purpose-built solution designed for things, specifically industrial control environments, operational technology, IoT that combines a software-defined network with a software-defined perimeter where every connection is natively zero trust, multi-factor authenticated, micro-segmented, encrypted end-to-end, and impervious to lateral movement, which means that it doesn't matter where the threat comes from, internal or external. If a device or a person actually manages to authenticate onto the network, which is never happened, but even if they did, they could only migrate from point A to any other point that they had explicit policy. So we like to say it delivers defense in depth without the expense in depth that characterizes most of the other approaches. Next slide. So it's our contention that invisibility, building hyper secure infrastructure that is simply invisible to threats, is the most effective way to secure infrastructure, because hackers and threats can't hack what they can't see. So maybe I'll get us a little bit back on time.
Great, thank you, Jeff. And now is the time where if you have any questions for anybody, please use that question and answer tool at the bottom of your screen and ask whatever questions you have. I'll start with a question for, let's see here. Sorry, I had it up and going. For Richard, let's start with you. There's a question in here that you started to answer, but getting some more insight would be great on kind of facing that adversarial machine learning attack. So does Trend Micro provide a solution even as adversarial machine attacks that foolproof the machine learning model itself?
Well, I answered on the online already. I provide some guideline, but we all definitely see the adversary are using, machine learning as a way of learning, attacking, customer or, some of the environment. And, we are very concerned, right? And the good news is that many of us actually in the security industry also doing the same thing, right? Using machine learning. Try to address some of these concerns as well. So I think there are some, product and solution already in the market to address some of this as well. But, when it comes to any type of a cyber attack, right, there's no silver bullet, right? I mean, there's no organization going to be coming out there saying, they're going to give you 100% guarantee, right? I think the goal is try to build a wall that is tall enough that to give it more challenging for the adversary to, really kind of attack your environment, and then it will kind of deter them from actually, attacking you, right? Otherwise, giving times and resource and effort, right? I mean, one point or another, they will be able to get into the system. So, yes, we do have concern, but the good news is, I think that we are in the security industry also working on some of these things to really address some of these issues. Hope that answered the question.
Great, yeah, definitely. And then moving on, going over to Jeff, who do you make how do you make services publicly available on the internet with this kind of invisibility that you're talking about here?
For publicly available resources, that's not the market we address. So if you have an e-commerce site or you have some other resource that requires random access by anyone, that wouldn't be a solution that we address. What we address is the need to keep private networks private, and in the past they've been private because there's been no external connection. But so many of the networks now require cloud connectivity or multiple data center for disaster recovery and so forth connectivity, and that's incredibly difficult to secure those environments. And so what we've done is develop a solution that allows it basically restores the logical air gap that once existed, despite the new requirements for having cloud connectivity for sensors or robots or IP cameras or what have you in what used to be a private network.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. Let's see here. And again, if there is any more questions, feel free to put it in the Q&A and we can try to get those answered. With that, are there any last comments or parting thoughts that we can kind of talk through that anyone wants to bring up? We're kind of at the end of our time, so I don't want to do anything too crazy. Great. I really want to thank all our speakers, especially our sponsors today, Tempered and Trend Micro. And I think the last thing we're going to do is, based on the Q&A that was in here, we're going to go ahead and do a drawing. And I'll pass it over. Carolina, does it make sense to just pass it to you to lead that?
I will share screen, and Brad, could you please grant me the permission to share screen?
And as she does that, as a reminder, this is this is a drawing to obtain a practical industrial Internet of Things security, a practitioner's guide to securing connected industry, the Kindle book, based on if you were able to answer a question or not. And we've put it in this, and she's going to spin that wheel and determine our winner.
Okay, let's see.
And there you go. Congratulations. I'm not going to try to pronounce your name because I'm sure I'll mess it up. But thank you very much. And thanks everybody, especially our panelists. And I really appreciate everyone's time. I hope we've been able to share a lot of useful information for you. And again, this presentation is being recorded and it will be available on, the slides will be available on PDF after this is over. Thanks everyone again, and have a terrific rest of the conference.